Imagine creating a fictional universe that spans, tens of thousands of years.
Right, like a truly massive undertaking.
Exactly. And you write it, it becomes this huge cultural phenomenon, and you even win the most prestigious award in all of sci-fi. You literally beat out J.R.R. Tolkien for best all-time series.
Which is just, I mean, it's wild to think
Yeah, it
about.
really is. But then 3 decades later, you sit down to reread your own masterpiece, and you realize you have completely forgotten why people liked it in the first place.
Yeah, you're just sitting there wondering what all the fuss is about.
Oh,
It sounds like this bizarre case of authorial amnesia.
totally.
But it is actually the genuine, documented reaction of the creator behind one of the most foundational texts in the genre.
And that creator was Isaac Asimov. Welcome to today's deep dive, where you and I are unpacking the massive significance of his Foundation series. We really want to look at this from a sci-fi fan's perspective and figure out, well, why is this universally considered the gold standard?
Yeah, and we have a fantastic stack of sources today to help us do that.
We do. We're using a really candid autobiographical essay by Asimov detailing the real-world creation of the books, right alongside actual excerpts from the Foundation Trilogy itself.
Having those honest reflections next to the text is just such a luxury that lets us track an idea from total panic into a masterpiece.
Oh, definitely. And to really get the scale of this, we have to start with that panic.
Right. It's August 1st, 1941.
Yeah, Asimov is just a 21-year-old chemistry grad student at Columbia, and World War II is raging.
France has already fallen by this point.
Exactly. And Asimov notes that the evil shadow of Adolf Hitler felt like it was just, falling over the entire world.
So he's carrying this huge psychological burden. The globe is fracturing. But on this specific day, he has a much more immediate problem.
Right. He's on a train heading to a meeting with John Campbell, the legendary editor of Astounding magazine.
And Asimov wants to pitch a story, but his mind is completely blank. I mean, he has absolutely no plot.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Asimov's solution is so relatable for anyone who has ever stared at a blank page.
Oh, for sure.
He uses this free association trick with a Gilbert and Sullivan book he has on him, Iolanthe.
Right.
It's basically like a desperate college student hitting the random article button on Wikipedia to find a term paper topic, and he accidentally invents an entirely new genre.
Yeah. He just opens the book to a picture of a fairy queen and a soldier. And seeing that soldier triggers this, wild chain reaction.
And soldier leads to military empires.
Exactly.
Right.
Which leads to the Roman Empire. And since he needs a sci-fi pitch, he makes this massive leap to a galactic empire.
It's just such a brilliant pivot.
It really is. He asks himself why he shouldn't write about the fall of a galactic empire. He had read Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire twice by then.
Wow.
Yeah, so he takes his real-world anxieties about Europe in flames and filters them through Roman history.
So he's basically using a fictional universe to explore how massive societies collapse and rebuild.
Precisely. So he gets to Campbell's office buzzing with this concept, and they brainstorm for an hour.
But they realize a story spanning thousands of years needs a special narrative engine. Because, normal characters would just die of old age by chapter 2.
Right, so they invent psychohistory. It's this fictional science combining sociology and complex mathematics.
Okay, but how does it actually work?
Well, the key nuance here is that psychohistory deals entirely with what Asimov calls man masses. It literally cannot predict individuals.
Wait, let me push back on this. If I'm a citizen in this universe and I just decide to, not go to work today, doesn't that ruin the grand mathematical plan?
No, that's the brilliant part. It accounts for that individual chaos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the sources compare it to a gas in a balloon. You can't track one specific bouncing molecule, but you can calculate the pressure of the gas as a whole.
Ah, I see.
So when you scale humanity up to quintillions of people, statistical probabilities take over. Free will just gets swallowed by math.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And so Hari Seldon, this brilliant scientist, used this math to foresee the fall of the 12,000-year-old galactic empire.
And he sees a 30,000-year dark age of barbarism coming after it.
Which is super bleak. But he figures out how to shorten it to just 1,000 years, right?
Yes, by establishing two foundations at, quote, opposite ends of the galaxy.
Okay, but again, logistically, how can a dead scientist actually manipulate thousands of years of the future? Isn't that just a pipe dream?
You'd think so, but Seldon uses deception. He sets up the first foundation on this remote planet called Terminus.
Right.
And he tells these exiled physical scientists They are there to create an Encyclopedia Galactica.
Which sounds like a noble pursuit, but
It's totally fake.
wow.
Exactly. It's a complete fraud, a will-o'-the-wisp just to trick the right scientists into the right place at the right time.
So they're basically isolated and backed into a corner, forced to act in inevitable ways during these bottleneck moments called Seldon crises.
Bingo. The math forces their hand.
But that means Seldon's math relies heavily on the Foundation citizens not knowing the master plan.
Which leads to a really unconventional narrative structure for a sci-fi epic.
Right. And fast forward 30 years, Asimov has to reread his own trilogy to prepare for a sequel.
And he notes he is filled with mounting uneasiness.
Because he realizes there is almost zero action. There is no physical suspense. Nobody is running around shooting blasters.
Yeah, it's all just thoughts and intense conversations in rooms with cigars.
I mean, sci-fi critic James Gunn noted that the success comes from a, quote, detective story fascination with the permutations and reversals of ideas.
It's all intellectual problem solving instead of space battles.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it's like a massive game of galactic chess.
Oh, absolutely.
The Foundation's most devastating weapons aren't lasers. They are trade embargoes and supply chain disruption.
Yeah, just look at Mayor Selvar Hardin. He maintains their independence by playing neighboring, heavily armed warlords against each other.
It's total geopolitical judo.
And then you have Ho Ballo, who defeats the hostile Republic of Corel using purely economic warfare.
Right, he goes there and sells them these trivial, vital nuclear gadgets, like washing machines and ashtrays.
He creates this massive technological dependency. And then, when Corel turns aggressive, Mallow doesn't send a fleet.
He just cuts off their spare parts until their economy completely freezes.
Exactly. They surrender unconditionally. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can really see why this appeals so deeply to sci-fi fans.
Definitely.
It completely subverts the genre. It elevates intellect and strategy way over brute force. It tells the reader that ideas are the true shapers of history.
But, okay, if the math is so perfect and the path is mathematically inevitable, where is the dramatic tension?
Well, Seldon's equations assume two things. No major text shifts, and that human emotional responses would stay constant.
So Asimov introduces an unpredictable variable to break the invisible rails of history.
Enter the mule.
Right, this mutant who can literally mold men's emotions.
Yeah, he is a biological freak.
Ah.
A single individual outlier, not a broad sociological trend.
So psychohistory literally could not foresee him.
Exactly. And the mule conquers the invincible First Foundation without a single fight. He turns his bitterest enemies into devoted servants.
Which forces the surviving characters to desperately seek out the ultimate mystery of the series. Where is the second Foundation?
Yes, because we learned the First Foundation on Terminus was purely physical scientists.
And the second Foundation was the mirror image, right?
Right. Mental scientists and psychologists meant to covertly guard the plan against mutants like the mule.
But nobody knows where they are.
Seldon only said they were at the opposite end of the galaxy. So people spent centuries measuring the galaxy with protractors looking for a physical opposite.
Like the exact opposite edge of the galactic rim.
Exactly.
Right.
But here's the brilliant twist. Seldon was a social scientist. To a social scientist, what is the opposite of the poor, cultureless, isolated periphery?
Oh, wow. It's the rich, culturally dominant center.
Trantor, the very capital of the old empire.
Hidden right in plain sight.
Yes, right at the center of where the empire was historically the strongest, subtly pulling the strings. It's so clever.
It really is. But, you know, just like the mule disrupted Seldon's plan, the massive fan base totally disrupted Asimov's own career plans.
Dude, completely. The historical momentum of the real world caught up with him.
It really did. The trilogy had a rocky start with poor distribution from Gnome Press.
Yeah. Asimov notes it barely made $1,500 in its first decade.
But then Doubleday rescued the rights, and it became their golden goose.
And in 1966, the fans gave it a one-time Hugo Award for Best All-Time Series.
Beating Asimov's own prediction that Lord of the Rings would win, which is insane.
But with that fame came relentless demand. The fans realized the books only covered 300 years of the 1,000-year plan.
They felt cheated out of the remaining 7 centuries.
They did. Even his good friend, fellow writer Lester Del Rey, badgered him constantly about finishing it.
Which is such a petty writer move. But then in 1981, Doubleday editor Betty Pratchker physically marches Asimov into her office.
She basically lays down the law and forces a $50,000 advance on him to write a new novel.
Which terrified him because his usual advance was like $3,000.
He hated the psychological obligation of large advances. But he eventually sits down, rereads his books, and writes Foundation's Edge.
And he has to bridge a massive gap, updating the science to include things like black holes and electronic computers.
Stuff that hadn't even been theorized when he first started the series in the 40s.
So, what does this all mean? The inescapable irony here is that Asimov basically became trapped by his own Seldon plan.
He really did. The creator became bound by the rules of his creation.
The mass behavior of his fan base, the historical momentum of his readers, forced him down this inevitable path to write more.
He literally couldn't escape the psychohistory of his own fan base. It's a perfect parallel.
Truly. And it's exactly why the Foundation series is a towering pillar of sci-fi. It completely flipped the script.
Taking the shiny tropes of spaceships and replacing them with sociology and economics.
Exactly. Showcasing the thrilling permutations of complex ideas. It proved that the psychohistorical equation is mightier than the sword.
It asked readers to engage with the invisible forces that govern societal decay.
It really did. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative detail to mull over.
Oh, this is a good one.
In his essay, Asimov confesses that he normally likes to tie up all his loose narrative ends with a neat little bow knot.
Right.
But for Foundation's Edge, he intentionally left one glaring little item completely unresolved.
He wrote it in hoping no one would notice it right away.
Just to leave a back door open for the future. So I ask you, if Hari Seldon could secretly build an entire second Foundation, hiding it perfectly in the social blind spots of history, what do you think Isaac Asimov hid in the blind spots of his own ultimate masterpiece?
A hidden variable quietly waiting in the wings. You'll just have to dive into this series and find out.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. See you next time.